Hello, my name is Alex Brown, and I'm a member of IUE 201. First of all, I want to ask, how many people here have been injured by the work you do, or know someone who has? I'm wearing this splint because I have tendonitis in my wrist, forearm, and elbow. It hurts to write, to drive, and to cook. I've spent 12 years at the General Electric plant in Lynn, Massachusetts, running machines, pulling wrenches, slinging hammers, and twisting my hands into almost any position to do what was needed. After 5 major injuries, they can't do much anymore. Sometimes, the hardest part is knowing that my injury was preventable. If I had had a real right to know about the hazards of repetitive motion, I wouldn't be injured today.
I worked on a grinding wheel. I would work with a piece of glass unfinished, uncut, a piece of glass, and etch it on, from the wheel. In order to make the lines, I would have to tilt the glass this way, and I'd be in this kind of position. This is where the pressure would come in, and this is where the most pressure was used, was on the leaves, and I would just press, and it would be fast in order to keep up with the rate, and it would be like so. Everyone who was a glass cutter always had, you could tell if they took a photograph, they were a glass cutter because their head was cocked to the side. They were all out of line. We have a group picture, they're all cocked to the side, every one of us. It's amazing what, a job can do to you, and we not knowing, what was happening to us, and I thought it was normal to feel these pains. I thought this was a normal procedure. You were supposed to feel pain because you were adding this pressure all the time. I went and seen a specialist because I was having more and more difficulty. And he took the test, the nerve conductive studies, and etc. And it did confirm that I had severe nerve damage. I started at 7 o'clock in the morning up to 5 o'clock. And I could be sit down, standing, folded, diaper, like 10 by 10. We make a bundle of 40. And that's all what we're doing all day. So every day is the same thing. 6 years after I started working, when I started feeling the pain, I was feel very, very bad, I thought my shoulder was going to be paralyzed or something, that I can't be able to work or use my hands, because if I doing some kind of job that I have to whip my hands like this, keep them for a while like that too much, it feel like my muscles is getting weak, and like if my hand's going to drop down. And it's very hard, it's hard to, that pain, you can't stand that pain, it's bad.
I work as an LSM keyer. I'm on the LSM, I'm an operator. So I do a lot of keying. I also did a great deal of dispatching, which is basically making sure that the mail is trayed and sleeved and put on the rollers to be dispatched to the various locations. The motion involved there was one of emptying the bins of letters in the back of the machine, which is a constant. I used to use my left hand, so it's a constant reach up or in, grab, take out, put in the tray. Did that constantly. I have an injury that's been diagnosed as tendonitis of the left elbow. It's also commonly called tennis elbow. Okay, and it has been associated, as diagnosed as job-related, by my doctors, because that was the only function I had in my life that had such a repetitive nature to it. As I described my function with grabbing, pushing trays down the rollers, he said that was it, and then even the keying, the area of keying, how the tendons all go up through the elbow, same thing.
After like 2 or 3 months on the computer all the time, I just started feeling tired. And I had no idea in the beginning that what was happening to me physically had anything to do with my job. All I felt was sore and achy all over. It wasn't until several months later, when really by then the damage had been done and it was too late, that I started realizing the link between being on that machine and having a sore arm. They said we caught it early. I was very lucky. I have talked to so many people in the doctor's offices who come in with scars up and down their arms and around their necks and shoulders, who it took 5 or 6 years to get diagnosed with thoracic outlet. Thoracic outlet, it is a vague thing. Something is pushing my whole shoulder down. And the thoracic outlet is a small opening between the collarbone and the top rib. And whatever is pushing it down is squishing that opening so that every nerve, artery, vein, muscle, everything that goes into my arm, under my arm, and into the top of my chest and neck is being impinged upon at all times.
It's hard to talk about it on a daily level. You know, if I thought a year and a half ago that I would still have been out of work, you know, I just would have given up all hope. It's a hard injury, I think, because there's no blood on the floor, you know, there's no gash with stitches. So people sort of think you're faking, or they think it's not so bad. I think the other hard part is not knowing if I'm going to be okay. You know, I've made my living through my hands the last 13 years. It's just hard to know what I'm going to be left with.
I feel as though I've been robbed of motherhood, that I sat there helpless. When the baby would cry to pick him up and my daughter would do it, I was robbed of it, you know, and I'm full of bitterness from that. You know, I can't help that. And even still today, when he wants to play ball, Mommy play baseball, I can't. I did this with my daughter, I can't do this with my son.
The first time I injured my wrist was 8 years ago. I went to the doctor and he said I could possibly have tendinitis or I could have carpal tunnel syndrome. Carpal tunnel syndrome, what is that? I've never heard of it. And at that time nobody was talking about it. And he explained that you have a number of small bones in your wrist called the carpal bones, and they make sort of a circle. And running through it are tendons and ligaments and nerves. And what happens is when you've done a lot of repetitive motion or forceful exertions, your tendons, they swell up and can put pressure on your nerve. And that causes a lot of the numbness and tingling. When I go to work with my splint, people came up to me and talked about problems they were having with their arms or wrists. Even guys who usually don't talk about aches and pains would come and talk to me. And I realized it wasn't just me, that there were a number of people out there with problems that sometimes weren't getting diagnosed as work-related because people didn't understand the work connection, or people just working in pain hoping that they can hang on.
At that time, I believe, per week, there was at least 2 to 3 girls per week dropping out of glass cutting, and they were injured. They were on workman's comp, and this is how rapid it went down.
It appears that occupational illnesses of the upper extremity, cumulative trauma disorders, repetitive strain injuries, occupational overuse syndrome, a bunch of terms for essentially hand-intensive repetitive work, is the fastest growing category of disorders in the American workplace.
There are alarming numbers of cumulative trauma disorders among computer users, and that number is going to grow, especially as office work becomes more and more automated, as the changes that result from computerization make working conditions in an office more like an automated assembly line, more like an office factory. We can expect the numbers of cumulative trauma disorders to increase. We're dealing with health problems that are potentially permanently disabling. It's changing the terms of the whole situation, because now workers really are facing the possibility that an injury related with their job will affect them for the rest of their life.
It was late in 1980 when we went down to visit some poultry plants, and the women that were working there pulled us aside and said people are getting something called carpal tunnel syndrome, which I had never heard of before. And then a couple of years later, when the supermarkets were getting in these new laser scanner cashier type checkouts, we started hearing from the workers that they were getting carpal tunnel syndrome and tendinitis. And by 1983 and 1984, it was very clear from our work with safety committees and our meatpacking plants that these repetitive trauma disorders were the #1 concern.
No matter how many times I've asked for changes, I was told that they'd be looked into and nothing ever happened. You just end up making do as best you can a lot of times, and that's when you get injured.
I've told them before myself, I felt that even though the machines and the Kias may have been timed out for 60 letters per minute, and they feel that that's the most efficient rate, from what we've been able to see in terms of the errors that are committed, you know, and just the various ailments that people suffer, if they cut the keying speed down even to 58, you know, which is 2 letters less a minute, you know, it makes a big difference.
We would like to have a better chair. It would change our life a lot, and I hope a lot, because in a way we could turn around and put the diapers, and we don't have to force our shoulder or our arm. Imagine with 40 diapers in your arm like this to put down. It's a lot of pressure to your hands back, okay? And that's bother here and up here because it's pressure in here too. And so that way we could grab the diaper, we just could turn around and put it in a line because the line is behind us.
So much of the attitude out there as well, it's the worker's fault. But they don't really think about how the job is designed and the kind of pressures you're under to just keep turning out the parts. People are getting injured from the kind of work, and they never want to really look at the work process of what we're being asked to do. You just get rid of that worker, and you just keep on rolling.
Everybody's still actually functioning just as they have been for years now, and they're all coming up with these same ailments. And you know, some ladies, some of the girls get like a bursitis in their shoulders and so forth. You know, a lot of people get the actual carpal tunnel in the wrist. You know, like I said, I got the tennis elbow. So it's not like management doesn't know that these you know, ailments are associated with the LSM, with the flat sorters, with the parcel sorters and so forth. But for some reason, anytime someone comes up with a statement saying that they're hurting in this way, it's like, prove it. Well, you know, I mean, I can understand them saying prove it, but it's just the attitude with which they say it, you know. Prove it, like it couldn't possibly be our job that's causing this.
Always sitting back there to torment me is, it was not necessary. I don't have a disease that I caught or something that happened in my bloodstream. I wasn't in a car wreck that I couldn't avoid. Everything that happened could have been avoided, and it could be avoided for all the other people. If I was injured there, it's only a matter of time before someone else is injured in that same environment, because since they did not believe me, they didn't make the changes that were necessary. They aren't taking the preventive measures that are necessary. And eventually someone else will be hurt.
You know, it's true that it's expensive to get new tools or change a workstation. But the other angle is, what about the cost to the worker? What about the cost to me of being in the pain for the rest of my life?
to get angry about it. And I started to want to really share any information I have with other workers and share strategies. Then I attended a workshop that was given at my union local, and it was on repetitive motion injuries, and they started to explain about the different risk factors that are involved in different jobs. When I took the knowledge I'd gained from the workshop on cumulative trauma injuries, and I took it back to analyze my job, it wasn't at all hard to see how I injured myself in the past from just doing my job. People really need to learn about this. When they learn about the injuries, maybe it will help prevent them.
I think the core of prevention, without a doubt, is education. With what we've done, just with the surveys and education in our place, we have prevented bad cases of CPDs. The awareness that the workers at our place have now is one of the added side effects to this, because if they get a pain in the middle of the night and they wake up, they're going to know what it is. And if it continues, they come to me, or they go to somebody else in the union and they say, look, I'm getting this pain. It's going in my arm. Woke me up last night. Is that the thing you're talking about? And I go, yeah. I flip them a card and I say, here, this is who you got to see. And it's a good feeling to catch something in the early stages like that, because you don't want anything to get permanent.
Your register was here, and
the belt was here,
was down there, and you were reaching them. Oh, you're really reaching over. They were a little different set up there.
One way you can look at your own job to see if it's the kind of work where cumulative trauma disorders might be a problem is with sort of a mental checklist in mind of posture, force, repetition, and rest. These posture, force, and repetition are risk factors. They're potential causes of cumulative trauma disorders. We call them cumulative trauma disorders, or repetitive strain injuries, or repetitive motion injuries, because generally they develop over relatively long periods of time, weeks or months or even years. It's important to keep in mind that muscles and tendons don't have to be exerting high levels of force each time they work for them to become injured. Tendons are slower to adapt to new patterns of motion than muscles are. And so it's possible for a tendon problem, a tendonitis, to develop over a relatively short period of time, and this is the kind of thing that's misleading to many people. For example, if you're sorting letters or you're typing at a keyboard, no single motion that you make has a lot of force involved. And the issue is not that the exertion is forceful, but that it's highly repetitive, that you are doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. I often look at a job in terms of what kinds of postures are you using? Do you have to work with your wrist bent, or with your arm up above shoulder height, or leaning forward from the waist, either sitting or standing? Awkward postures like that, where you're kind of twisting and you don't feel like it's very comfortable. It's not the way you would stand naturally.
Posture is probably one of the first places that you want to look. If you're keying at that terminal all day long, it's very important that you be in a chair that's providing you with the right kind of support and enabling you to sit in the right position, that you have an adjustable keyboard height and an adjustable screen height, so that your body is in the proper relationship to the piece of equipment. One of the most important aspects of office design for office workers to pay attention to is the position of their arms and the wrist. However, you can have a picture-perfect workstation. You could have model posture, but if your job design is not ergonomic, then you are still going to be at risk for developing a repetitive strain injury. So, for example, if you're keying 8 hours a day at work and you've only got a short break in the morning and a short break in the afternoon, you're at a higher risk of developing a repetitive strain injury. And what we recommend is that if you're doing intensive work at the VDT, you should be taking a break every hour. It doesn't necessarily mean you're taking a coffee break every hour. Perhaps it's a break to do some other kind of work that enables you to get up and move from that position and stop keying, just to give those muscles a rest.
A rest is very important in this. I think it's really important to understand that rest isn't prescribed or recommended because for any fanciful reason. When someone has tennis elbow, what does the physician say? Go out and play tennis, go out and play a number of other sets, enter a tournament immediately? No. The answer is rest. Why should it be different for work? I think it's extremely important if someone has a problem which was related to repetitive injury, to extreme exertion of force that causes inflammation and pain, they should also be given rest as part of their prescription.
There are a number of new programs like Just-in-Time, Total Quality Management, Cell Work Organization that are new forms of work organization. Management in the United States is very sold on them, saying that they are going to be the savior of U.S. industry. What we find is that they are very good techniques for focusing and intensifying work. And whether that's psychological and leads to stress problems, or it's physical and leads to increased cumulative trauma disorder type problems, because it's a way of eliminating any slack time, any break time, any downtime.
After I had my son, I went back and it was the just-in-time system that was taken over. That's when my horror began. I was told when I went back to work, if you cannot cut 125%, you go home. Just like I was nothing. And I went back to the machine and I says, I'm going to try this again. I was cutting and I had all this pressure on my side, and I'm pushing against the wheel, the grinding stone, to make the design, and shaken with anger and fear, and that I wasn't going to be able to do my job, and that was going to be the end of me. Well, that was the end of me, because what happened was the glass I was cutting flew out of my hand, bounced back, hit my hand, and then I hit the wheel, and I was in trauma instantly.
If that machine is running just 1 letter a minute faster than it's supposed to, it makes quite a bit of difference, and I can feel it. And because of my, like I said, the tendinitis, as soon as my fingers have to start moving faster than normal, I pick it up right away.
You are constantly with your hands out here.
I first learned about ergonomics at a workshop held at my union, and that's where I first learned about cumulative trauma, but also about ergonomics, which is the science of making work safe for workers. And since then, you know, it's been clear to me that the knowledge is out there to make jobs safe.
A good working definition of ergonomics is designing the job to fit the worker. And by the job, we mean all aspects of the job. In addition to redesigning the entire workstation or a large piece of equipment, sometimes selecting a different hand tool can be another way to fit the job better to the person.
The nice thing about ergonomics is a lot of it is very simple. A different cutout in a work table so that you can stand closer to your workpiece. A bench that's lower or higher by a couple inches. All these things can make significant difference in the injuries that people suffer on the job.
People often ask me how difficult a lot of these changes in the workplace really are. And some of them can be, but the majority of them don't require a rocket scientist to define or implement. Again, it's not hard to find the risk factors in the workplace, and it's not that difficult to actually come up with mechanisms or engineering controls to reduce the stress for these risk factors. The hard part has always been convincing management to change.
This fight is really up to us. It's a fight about strong health and safety committees, strong contract language, strong laws, strong enforcement, and just compensation. In every struggle around health and safety, we've had to come up with our own strategies to get changes made.
Some employers may respond immediately and purchase the right kind of equipment, make changes in people's jobs in order to prevent cumulative trauma disorders. Other employers, for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure people have different experiences, may be resistant to making those changes. Steps you're able to take will depend on whether you're in a union or non-union workplace. Strategies will always have two levels. One is what you as an individual can do, and the second is what your employer should be doing in order to prevent a risk of repetitive strain injury. My primary suggestion is that in approaching your employer about making changes, you not do it alone. Especially if you're in a non-union workplace, you don't want to be identified as a troublemaker. You don't want to be isolated. The next step is to get together a committee that then can begin the process of planning and developing a longer-term strategy for making changes.
In our experience, the only companies that have really gone ahead and changed jobs to try to get rid of the hazard have been where there are very strong union safety committees voicing the workers' concerns and the workers' interests and keeping the pace of change going. Because right now there are no specific OSHA regulations and there's no government hammer about to hit companies over the head. And so something else has got to motivate them to change. And really a good, strong union safety committee and with good worker participation can really be a motivational force. In a meatpacking plant, we convinced the company to set up a separate joint labor management committee on ergonomics along with ergonomic monitors, which was our name for workers that spent almost full-time dealing with the ergonomic problems in the plant, recommending solutions, testing out solutions, and really just keeping the company's feet to the fire.
It's very useful to document health problems and symptoms that everyone in your work area is experiencing. Perhaps the first step would be to document the extent of the problem and identify any particular areas where there's extreme problems through a survey.
As research and education director, I came up with this survey. Physical problems came out, I broke them down to back, shoulder, arm, neck, wrist, and hand. Here's one person says, I have only been king a few months and I have developed a pain in my left wrist. It bothers me both in and out of work. I feel it is due to the one-man station. I presented that to management as far as look what's happening. This is what is happening to these people. They're getting hurt. And what are you going to do about it? When OSHA came in, this became a very good part of the citation. The OSHA inspector sat down and said, what do you have for me? Right? I had a stack of papers and I said, here, this is what I got that could probably help you. It was a list of people that have CPD problems, which he interviewed all of them.
New technology affects every aspect of every workplace, and so it's a very important issue, particularly now that technology is changing faster and faster. The only way unions are going to be able to deal with this is to get technology clauses that say they have a right to look at new equipment before it's installed, and to demand that ergonomic design criteria be built into the decision-making about any new equipment that's being brought in.
We have no specific standards right now to tell an employer exactly what to do or not to do in the workplace to deal with this problem. We are putting out a set of general industry guidelines in draft form here in the next few months, which should serve as a basis for an ergonomics program that management can implement if they indeed do have ergonomic or cumulative trauma disorders. We have a litany of positive reasons of why employers should develop ergonomic interventions and good programs, but we are also an enforcement agency, and we do have the general duty clause for those employers who continue to put their employees at risk and continue to debilitate them. We can therefore go in and cite them and attempt to force them to do what we believe is the right thing to protect the safety and health of their workforce.
I think that in terms of strategy, unions should get a hold of some of these settlement agreements that OSHA's been writing, and some of these companies because they can serve as models for the kinds of programs that companies should be put in, but I don't think you can rely on OSHA to get them into your plant. Unfortunately, in this day and age, OSHA is a small agency with few resources. But that in the end, in terms of OSHA enforcement, it is the final hammer or tool that you have to get things done. And I think if you've worked with the employer for some time and have seen no results in terms of action on ergonomics, and you've well documented the problem, then I think it might be time to turn to the government, the federal government, and ask them to come in and do an inspection.
You know your body best, you know, and you know what type of ailments you're accustomed to experiencing on a normal level, and you know what's strange, you know, and when you feel something strange, don't take it lightly, you know, because it could be a precursor to something much greater that's getting ready to happen to you.
We might have a little tingling or numbness, a little aching in our hands, and we think, well, it's really not stopping me from doing what I do, and my hands get tired after keying all day. Take a couple of aspirin and just keep going. But that's the point at which we need to stop and think, well, these symptoms could be the early warning signs of a much more serious injury in the long run. I cannot emphasize enough that when you first begin to experience symptoms, don't just take 2 aspirin and keep going. Get it checked out.
I think it's really hard sometimes to keep going because it feels like you're just raising issues and nobody cares and nobody listens and it don't get anywhere. So that when someone does some of the changes we need, it really inspires me to keep on going.
One of the big pilot programs we have going is with a big meatpacking plant, which, you know, meatpacking has some of the highest rates in the country. And during the first year, all they did was hold a 2-hour educational seminar for all the workers on what cumulative trauma disorders were. They actually got in a whole new medical program, which was really very worthwhile, so that people would be diagnosed early on with these conditions and given light duty as opposed to just lingering at their job. And then they basically just lowered a couple of conveyor belts, and that was it during the first year. And you know what? That was more than any other meatpacking plant had ever done. And so I would have liked them to have redesigned their whole plant in the year, but you know, even the workers said to me, this is more than we got in 15 years.
There have been cases in other countries where workers and unions have actually gotten together with computer scientists or engineers to design workstations, to design work processes that are worker-based, that start from the role of the skilled worker, and so that they really integrate human needs into the design process. It certainly is a model that can be used to show that it can happen. And it's important in saying to management, you can design things with people in mind and they still work.
The workers wanted to take a look at new tools and different kinds of knife handles, and the workers actually came up with different knife designs. It took us about 7 months from starting with the drawings to getting the prototypes made. They're now in the plant and they're now being tried out and tested and evaluated. A lot of our local unions, you know, did studies to document the extent of the problem, to, you know, prove to the industry that this is a problem that needs to be reckoned with. And one of our local unions in Canada actually got money from the government to come up with a new scanner to show that there are ways to change these scanners to make them ergonomically designed.
When stewards like Tom go out on the floor and get people to fill out surveys, to get people to sign individual complaints and grievances, that says an awful lot in terms of what labor is all about, what it's always been about, and hopefully what it's going to continue to be about. And that's protecting not only wages, hours, and working conditions, but working conditions that are safe working conditions.
I think a lot of us go to work every day feeling like the workplace is set up, it's the way it is, it's the way it's always been, and that it can't change. But the reality is that there are a lot of changes that can be made. Some of them very simple to make, others more difficult, but it can be different. We don't have to destroy our bodies in order to earn a living, in order to do a job.
If I'm going to stay there, I like to get things better. So I don't care a lot. I fight. Because if you don't fight for what you want, you're never going to get there. So you have to be strong and fight all the time for what you want.
We are also here to fight for the millions who remain working in this nation's workplaces. We know that unsafe and unhealthy working conditions are causing us to become ill and work hurt. We know that we must stop this violence. This is our fight, a fight for our lives.